I spent most of 2023 and a good part of 2024 recovering from surgery, and that slowed me down, but it didn't stop me. I worked on a design for the wainscoting in my kitchen for a good part of that time, and then I started the project and got a couple hours in here and there whenever I could. But if it wasn't for that drawing that Todd Murdoch helped me on, I never would have attempted this. This is all based on a Tori Gate design. The cloud lifts on the two side panels are from the Green Brothers. You can see how there's a relationship between the work that the Green Brothers did and the Japanese Tori Gate. Both the cloud lift and the Tori Gate share a natural organic design. Now let's look at the classical orders. This is a replica of the Parthenon. It's in Nashville, Tennessee. It's built with a Doric order. The columns are Doric, and along with the Doric order, we see triglyphs up in the entablature, along with mythological figures in the metape spaces between the triglyphs, as well as a decorated tympanum. That's that triangular shape in the gable end. The Parthenon is a perfect example of classical order. Notice how it's not really organic. It's an ideal representation of perfection. Now let's look a little bit closer at the structure of a classical order. A classical column supports a beam that's called an entablature, and the bottom of the entablature is called the architrave. The top of the entablature is called the cornice. Notice how similar a Tori form is to a classical order. Two columns are supporting what looks like an entablature, made up with a cornice, called a kasagi and a shimaga, and what resembles an architrave, a nuki. The difference between a classical order and a Tori is noticeable. A Tori is organic. It looks like something you'd see in a forest, not something you'd see on the top of a hill in white marble. So you always start with a good SketchUp drawing. And once you've got the drawing, you can create templates from it. And that's what makes this whole process easy and simple. Once you have your drawing, it's real easy to convert it to a simple line drawing. And that's what you want for the template. To create a full-scale template, if you don't know how, and I sure didn't know how, follow Todd Murdoch's cheat sheet. I'll include a link to it below. I had to print my templates on my printer at my desk. My paper wasn't big enough to print the whole thing, so I glued pieces together. First, I aligned the lines up on the template. Then I pinched the paper down to my work table, folded it back so it wouldn't move, then sprayed that end and glued it down so the alignment would stick just right. Then I sprayed the same contact adhesive onto a piece of plywood and glued the full-size template right to the plywood. After that, it's real easy. I just cut out the template using a bandsaw, staying about 1/8 or 1/16 of an inch away from all the lines so I wouldn't ruin the template. I wanted to sand those lines, but I wanted to sand perfectly so the template was exactly the right size. I used a disc sander to sand to the line. I used an oscillating sander, and I used a little pad sander too to make sure that the curve on that radius was a fair curve. In other words, it was smooth and transitioned smoothly across the template. I needed two templates for the kasagi. One the exact size of the kasagi, which I've already made, and another one bigger so I'd have room to clamp the workpiece to the template. I also wanted that bigger template so I could use it as a guide for cutting that 30-degree chamfer on the edge of the kasagi. I used a bottom-bearing pattern bit to copy the original template onto the larger template. In the original template, I traced the shape of the kasagi onto a piece of wing A. I cut to within 1/8 of an inch of the line, knowing I'd be able to clean that up perfectly using the template and a pattern bit. I started with a ball bearing guided straight cutter, and then I switched to another router with that big chamfer bit, 30 degrees. I made several passes, the first couple a climb cut, and then I came back in the finish direction. And that's the other reason I wanted that larger template. so I wouldn't risk blowing out that pointed end with a router bit. After that, everything got real easy and happened quickly. I just put the original template onto the top of the wing A and finished off the back of it, again using a pattern bit. And then I switched templates to the Shimagi and cut that out exactly the same way, out of Paduk. I didn't need a secondary template for that. There's no chamfer on the Shimagi. I fastened the template to the back of the Shimagi with screws. They aren't going to show. And then again, I used a pattern bit and a router to follow the template and make the cut perfect. All the straight pieces for the Tori Gate were super simple. All I did was cut them to the patterns and then mortise them for dominoes so I could assemble the whole thing perfectly. Once I had all the pieces for the Tori Gate finished, I switched over to the flanking panels and the cloud lifts. I used exactly the same method with templates, cutting wide of the mark, and then using a bearing guided pattern bit to follow the template and make every piece exactly the same. The wainscoting frame and paneling was probably the easiest part of the whole project. I made it the same way I always do, pocket screwing the frame together. I routed out for the flanking panels, set them, and then glued the back of them so I could glue the main panel to the flanking panels. I wanted the center panel to be deeper, to have more reveal on the stiles, so that the Tori Gate could be thicker and still not be too proud of the stiles and rails. I used Fast Cap's double stick tape, applying it to each part of the back of the Tori Gate, and then I set it in place and stuck it to the center panel. Once it was adhered, I reached around behind and drilled pilot holes and threw screws in through the back of the panel. And no, I didn't miss even once. I used the same method with the double stick tape for the cloud lifts, but I couldn't pre-assemble those like I did the Tori Gate. So I used the original template to position each one of the sun rays, starting with the center one, and then I put the cloud lift up, and after the cloud lift went in, I put the other two flanking sun rays, and then the rays that break through the cloud lift down to the bottom rail. Remember, I had 2 layers of 1/4 inch paneling behind the sun rays, so those 23 gauge pins and the double stick tape were more than enough to secure all the sun rays and the cloud lifts. I think I sprayed about maybe 10 coats of pre-cat varnish on top of that. It was a lot. It looked really sweet. It was worth the effort putting all those coats on there. And trust me, with all those coats of varnish, those 23 gauge pins just disappeared. And then the install. The install was the usual typical simple thing.